Okay, I can see that we're now streaming, so I think we can make a start. So welcome everyone to September meeting. First of all, thanks for allowing the rescheduling to fit around my travel arrangements. It's much appreciated. So without further ado, agenda item 1, apologies and any substitutions.
Yeah, thank you. So we've had apologies from Councillor Paula Dunn and then also Councillor Linda Smith, the Cabinet member for the HRA Energy Efficiency Projects item, sent her apologies, but we have Councillor Railton and Juliet here to cover that item.
Great, thank you both very much. Any declarations of interest on any of the items on the agenda?
Just that I live in one of the LTN areas that is referred to in the monitoring report on air quality.
I think there was a rule of thumb established when this meeting was set up that it wouldn't ever talk about LTNs, so I think you're okay. Any other declarations of interest? Nope. I have no announcements, but I am going to suggest a slight change to the order of the agenda to make sort of most efficient use of Pedro, Juliet and Anna's time, which is that we do items, our substantive business items 7, 8, 9 and 10 first, and then come back and do the kind of internal processy things under 4, 5, 6 and 11 at the end, if that's okay. Everyone happy with that? In which case we move to item 4, which is the HRA Energy Efficiency Projects. We have the report. We have Anna Railton as the Cabinet member, or one of the Cabinet members, and we have Juliet Nicholas as the report author. So over to you in whatever order of double act you want to do to introduce the report and any issues in it.
Sorry, Alex, just to be clear, it's item 7, not item 4.
Sorry, item 7. Yes, you're right. It's my fault.
No problem. I'm happy to kick off, Anna.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
I'll just give a quick intro to the report. So the report is covering sort of business as usual, HRA delivery of projects. The budget has previously been agreed. So the report is regarding the remaining 1.585 million after the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is a Fabric First project that's underway. It's covering projects that are leading towards our EPC by 2030 targets, our net zero aspiration by 2040, and also the phase out of gas boilers from 2036. There's various different projects that we're proposing to deliver, and these are sort of to test measures to achieve the targets. There's not one solution is going to fit everything, and they're also helping to support the development of net zero delivery strategy, and the sort of delivery is regardless of government funding, as we need to sort of continue progress to deliver our targets. I guess the question is, do you agree with the recommendations to proceed with the projects and delegate? Do you have any questions?
Okay, Juliet, you kind of faded out there. I'm hoping that wasn't a technological failure, it was just the end of the sentence.
How far did you get?
So it was just kind of like towards the end, did we agree with her, and then it kind of faded for me a little bit.
Did you agree with the recommendations?
Oh, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. Anna, did you want to add anything at this stage?
I think one clarifying point I will make is that this does not include, and is distinct from, the Clean Heat Street scheme in Rose Hill. Yeah. Although that may contain council houses, it's not within this funding lump, so it's not in this report. But that's all I've got really. Thank you, Juliet.
Useful, thank you. Right, I'm going to throw it open to Emily and Catherine, and Emily's away first, and if you don't pick up some of the things I wanted to pick up, I'll do that at the end. So Emily first and then Catherine.
Great. Just item 9 on this page 41 about the ASHP trial in 22-23. 2 questions. Firstly, could you just summarise for me either where I can find details of the results of that trial, or just give me a kind of a couple of bullet points on it? I'm sorry to not be fully kind of cognizant of it. And secondly, could you confirm, it says 500 grand to deliver about 40 heat pumps. Can you confirm the kind of properties? Because that looks high for like a standard residential house, but they may not be a standard residential house. So could you just give me a bit of clarity on that cost to, you know, number of heat pumps ratio?
Yeah, so I'll start with the cost one. So it is an estimation, and it's effectively what we expect it to cost, given that actually it's not just the air source heat pump. We may come across other sort of things that need to happen. So if we were removing a gas boiler, we may need to look at the kitchen, some works within the kitchen to put that back to as it was before. So the cost is sort of looking to cover those additional costs beyond the air source heat pump itself. And obviously there's also the heat radiator sort of heating distribution upgrades as well. So that's for the
fine. So full heating system replacement plus any kind of additional works plus contingency, and that's why it looks higher than the average kind of might be. But that's for sort of 40 fairly standard homes. It's not blocks of flats or anything like that.
No flats. It would be just we're looking at detached and semi-detached properties initially. Sort of avoid planning there.
Perfect. And could you then give me the just a couple of bullets on the trial?
Yeah, so it's a very small trial. We rolled out, I think it was 6 air source heat pumps in council properties, and at the moment we are monitoring those to see the efficiency, and we're getting very high efficiencies from that, and we've sort of taken away the learnings from that of how it was delivered and why we're getting those high efficiencies so that we can roll those out on other projects.
Fabulous. There's just been research published suggesting that they're kind of 2 to 3 times more efficient than we thought they were as well. But I don't know how robust that is, but so yeah, great, fabulous. Thank you. That was my key question.
Lovely. Catherine.
Yeah, so I've got 2 questions. One is, are you seeking comparative costs for alternative contractors in addition to ODS? Because I am concerned about the cost and whether that represents value for money. Whilst I'm supportive of the ODS model, there are 2 concerns. One is based on other things that they've been delivering, whether they seem to be significantly more expensive than other contractors. But secondly, and a related question to that point is, do they have the adequate skills in this specialist area to be able to be delivering on this in a value for money way? And a second, and this is a more general question, so that was 2 sub questions related to the cost point, and that is around the number of properties that you're looking to get the EPC rating established on. I think it refers to 350, and just wondering why that number, and why not identify the EPC rating of all of the property portfolio. That'd be not a sensible option. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll cover the EPCs first. So that's effectively what we think is a realistic delivery in a timescale and within the budget, which is why we've gone for that figure. And it's going to be a rolling programme following years. We do have an idea of EPCs for a piece of software that the council has, but again, it's theoretical. So this will be to test that data and sort of look at how accurate that data is and how much we can rely on it.
I think we're losing you, Juliet. Sorry, the sound seems to have gone.
Yeah, you might have a loose wire or something.
No, if I turn my video off, would that be okay with you? So
yeah, that'd be fine.
I think I've got a storm overhead. I think that might be the problem. Is that better?
so far?
Yeah, let's give that a try. Yeah, so on the EPCs, I'll just go over that again. We're looking at those 350 sort of as a test bed for our data, and then we can look at that against other archetypes, and that falls within budget and we're timescales. It's a quantifiable, deliverable sort of number. Does that answer the question? Councillor Miles, did you hear?
Yes, I mean, I think it would be valuable to understand the EPC rating of all properties that we own at within a time frame, at maybe at a longer period if we need more time. But I think we should have that information for all of our properties ultimately. But I appreciate that under the time constraints that you're getting a sample. Thank you.
Yeah, and that is the plan, is to continue that programme on rolling, so that we've got EPC data for all of our stock. And then going back to your first question about the sort of value for money, the procurement exercise hasn't been done as yet, and we haven't decided a procurement route. ODS is one route, but we will need an additional partner for the design anyway. So that's something, yeah, to be explored as part of the procurement process.
You got that, Catherine? There was a little bit of breakup.
I did. So I mean, it sounds like the procurement options are potentially open still. So not necessarily just ODS to be the options, is what I understood from that.
I had a similar question, so obviously kind of great minds and all that kind of thing. I think there's definitely an issue there. So if I ask mine and then see where we come to on that. The question I had was again around the procurement and the nature of the procurement. The way the report is laid out is because of the way local government financing works. There is a fixed and finite sum of money, and therefore a flexible number of potential completed works, and obviously if the costs go up, then the number of completed works will probably go down, that being the nature of the beast. One of the issues is that there is a shortage of specialist contractors, not just an ODS issue. I think it's a national issue, and certainly looking across Oxfordshire at the moment, there is, you know, there's, you can see anyone who's trying to carry out this work will know that it's a buyer's market as far as builders and contractors are concerned. They can set roughly what price they want. And I think there's also an issue with the multiple layers of RA as the landlord, the council, in other words, as landlord and as client, managing through ODS as project manager a series of third-party contractors, and that's sometimes been okay and sometimes it has not. So my question is, what's your take on the market at the moment in terms of these specialist subcontractors, and will you be taking special care, I guess is the right word, cognizance or whatever, of getting that project management element right if you're using ODS as the main contractor and then subcontractors beneath them?
Okay, so in terms of the market at the moment, we've done some soft testing with some suppliers, and they have capacity to deliver, and they have capacity to do design as well. We've sort of had those initial conversations, and I think that it is gradually growing the market. I think this might be more of an issue sort of in a year or so's time, but currently there is capacity. And then on the second point about the ODS project management, if we do go down the ODS route, then yes, project management and making sure that subcontractors are delivering will be part of the delivery programme.
Can I just ask a supplementary question? Obviously, we're talking about a release of a fixed element of budget, but with an expectation there's going to be further rounds, because there's just going to have to be. I mean, from the EPC issue, and as well as everything else. Is there scope in the tendering process, particularly for the subcontractors, to look at longer term relationships with the subcontractors that might get better value by giving them certainty, even though that might be an issue for the council? So I suppose the question is, looking at building a long-term relationship with a subcontractor through ODS, for example, would that be a way of helping to mitigate some of the risks involved here?
It's a possibility. It's not, as I say, we haven't explored exactly which procurement route that we are taking, but it's certainly something that we could explore. And we are considering sort of other options for sort of longer term procurement and sort of projects going forward as well.
Okay, I'm beginning to get a sense of a possible recommendation here, which might be telling you to do something you're already doing, but it's good to get it recorded, which is about exploring the full range of procurement options, including medium-term partnerships or whatever. Catherine, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just builds on your point, Alex, which is around whether or not you're considering, as you are in the purchasing process of this, bulk buy, sort of, how to frame this, whether the cost reduces per unit based on increasing the number of pumps that you're installing, because at the moment it seems relatively high price, and given that you've got such large multiples of pumps that you'll be wanting to install, just wonder whether you will have scope to negotiate possibly on price around that during the procurement process. So I guess it's to Alex's point about this longer process over and above this particular contract.
From experience, numbers may help with sort of survey costs and things like that, and a long-term relationship may reduce those. However, from experience, it's very much individual property based on the pricings, and I've not found sort of bulk contracts reducing that cost as such. But again, it's something potentially that we could explore as part of the procurement process.
Thank you.
I think of the two, I think long-term relationship tends to be the one that reduces cost more than bulk buy. But obviously we're in a high inflation environment at the moment, which makes even that kind of tricky. You can get caught out, as some contractors have clearly at the moment, with what look like good long-term relationships, and it turns out that they they're tied to a fixed price contract, and their suppliers are in turn putting their prices up, which is why you've seen a large number of builders go under recently. So did you, Emily or Catherine, do you want to pursue any further points around this, or can we frame a recommendation around this procurement question?
Well, I personally would say that I wouldn't want it to be like a direct award to ODS. I know as a tackle company you can do that, but I would recommend that there are alternative providers that are requested to provide a quote as well.
Yeah, I think what I would probably frame it slightly openly, so there's a degree of flexibility. So Alice, I hope you can turn this into some degree of English, but it would be something like the panel recommends, let's say recommends, so we're using that word, recommends that a full range of procurement options, including alternative suppliers and medium to long-term relationship based contracts, rather than simple buy 30 off the back of a van kind of a thing. So that disintegrated beyond, it was sounding quite learned for the first half, and then it fell apart. But it's that kind of thing I think that we want to be looking at, just around flexibility. This is a big long-term project. This is just one small stage of it, and it's about building up the skill levels and are building up the relationships, because without those, if we're going to the market every 30 or 40 properties, that's unlikely to be efficient. I'm sure ODS would say the same thing, but it's not. I think I don't think it's wrong of us to be making that point publicly and clearly. Anna, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to say, so correct me if I'm wrong here, Juliet, but with respect to the sort of like bulk buying aspects, sort of coming from the other side, my understanding is a lot of these properties have been chosen because they're all actually kind of similar, so that the jobs that would need doing on them would also be similar, if that makes sense. So, you know, it's all semis that are all built at the same time in a, you know, similar construction, that kind of thing.
Juliet?
Yeah, so effectively it will be more around EPC banding as to those that we target and sort of certain fabric requirements before we install, particularly an air source heat pump. But yeah, again, the bulk buying isn't quite the same on sort of these sorts of projects.
Okay, I think we've got something around the procurement. I'm just going to ask, I think it was Catherine who mentioned, who raised this. It's kind of stated and implied in the paper that there will be eventually a full EPC rating for all the properties. I mean, obviously, it's only as good as the last time you looked at it. Something the tenant may do may improve an EPC and you wouldn't know about that, so you need to go back and refresh. But would we want to do a recommendation, perhaps asking the council as landlord to have a clear, to set a timetable? So we don't set the timetable, but we ask that the council as landlord sets a timetable for achieving the objective of having a full set of EPCs. You may already have that, but if you haven't, can we recommend it?
I would support that recommendation.
Juliet?
I think we need baseline data.
Yeah, I mean, if you've already got a target, there's no point us telling you to have one, but if you haven't quite got one yet, then that kind of, you know, expresses the tenor of the conversation.
It's being developed as part of the delivery plan.
Perfect. Well, in which case we can recommend that you do the thing that you're already doing but haven't quite done yet, which is perfect. That's very scrutiny. Right. Excellent. So we've got two recommendations, albeit with wording that needs some finessing. This report is going to Cabinet tomorrow.
Yeah.
So Alice, I hope that those recommendations go for something short and simple, because Alice has got to basically write these tonight or first thing tomorrow. So I hope that's good. I did give a forewarning about the procurement one, so with any luck, she's got something thinking about that. If we're covered on this, I think we can say thank you very much and good night to Juliet. Thank you for persisting through the weather and the technology. Much appreciated. And we can move on to the next item, which is item 8. I'm looking at the wrong briefing note with the wrong numbers on, so I think 8 is correct, isn't it? The citywide smoke control area declaration, for which we have Anna again and Pedro. Thanks, Juliet. Good night.
Bye.
Who wants to go first?
Shall I go?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so this report is all about seeking approval for the creation of a citywide smoke control area. So basically, at the moment, Oxford City has 23 active smoke control areas that cover around 48% of the city. These had been created in the late 50s, and so this proposal is for revoking those and creating a single one that covers the entire city of Oxford. So the benefit of this proposal is to reduce the risk of harmful emissions from uncontrolled burning of solid fuels, from open fireplaces and unapproved stoves. And we think that with this proposal, we are ensuring consistency, we'll minimize confusion and raise awareness of the controls that are in place in terms of the enforcement for the burning of solid fuels. And at the same time, we will be raising awareness of the health impacts of burning solid fuels, which is something that will link quite well with the wood burning campaign that we've launched last year. I think I wanted to be as much objective as possible. So I don't want to waste much time. I don't know if Councillor Anna wants to add anything to it at this point. I think the report is already quite self-explanatory in a way.
Anna, do you want to add anything?
I think, yeah, just to emphasize that this is very much a public health sort of angle. It's not about carbon emissions. It's very much about pollutants. It's very much about particulates, and it is very much about the health effects of burning. And yes, there are some other advantages as well, namely about simplifying the sort of enforcement and who is in what and whatever, because everybody will be the same for the first time since the 50s if this goes through. Yeah, I think that's what I've got. Thank you very much.
Okie dokie. I can see Emily already, so I'm going to start with you.
Great. So look, I think this is a great idea, and I think this is an excellent report. It's very clear. It highlights basically all the key issues, and you know, I'm really happy that we're doing this. You know, and it's just so important. Anyway, it's brilliant. Well done. 3 points. Firstly, you don't mention Chris Whitty's report from December 22. It's a very minor point, but I think that should come in here for the people that have less context on this than, you know, me. I think it's worth highlighting that this was the thing that the Chief Medical Officer chose to write his report about. And obviously that's where the illustrative picture you've got in there comes from. Minor point, I just think it's worth mentioning, right? Second point, I believe we're one of the first outside London to have a citywide SCA. I might be wrong about that, but again, if we are, I think it's worth mentioning that. And the third point is, and this may be too much detail at this stage, but you know, with Oxford University, we have some of the leading, you know, globally leading people that are working on this. I know that Felix Leach, Professor Felix Leach, has worked with Oxford City before because it says it in his profile. It feels like at least when we get to the comms stage, we should potentially be leveraging some of the brand halo that Oxford University gives us to at least have quotes or at least speak to those kind of people that are world experts to get this message out of what we're doing, you know, being pretty seminal and allowing that to be disseminated to other councils. I have a fourth point, which is that I know the founder of Mums for Lungs, and she says that the campaign that was done, Do You Feel Good, was really like best in class, and there are a number of improvements that could be made, but that it's been recommended to a lot of other councils by Mums for Lungs and others. So what I mean is that I think we are showing leadership in this particular area, and therefore we might as well do it as well as we can. They are my 4 points, and I'm not sure how relevant any of them are to this direct report, but yeah, there you go.
I mean, I would say probably they wouldn't necessarily form a recommendation, but I hope that Anna and Pedro are listening to the wise advice on publicity. Is what I would say. But we'll see how the discussion goes. That may be just me. Catherine. And then, sorry, Pedro and Anna, did you want to respond to any of those points?
I can just perhaps add on some of the points. So point number 2, we are not the only local authority outside of London doing this. As we speak, Reading is doing it. They are a little bit more ahead of us in the sense that they got approval from Cabinet 2 months ago, and now they are they've launched recently last week their public consultation for the expansion. And on point number 3 on comms, yes, I will seek to. I will make sure that that point is mentioned when we have those discussions with our comms colleagues about the inclusion of Felix and the work that we've been doing with the Oxford University on PM 2.5.
And Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer. I think that's just a really important point for Cabinet and for everybody. Anyone that thinks of opposing this, you know, it is the leading medical kind of challenge that the chief medical officer thinks it's worth writing about following COVID. So I just think that's a very strong message. You know, we saw the Conservatives object to this on exceptionally spurious grounds that showed that they hadn't read the data. You know, this is Conservatives at county, but nevertheless, you know, going against your own chief medical officer's advice is an interesting call to make.
I can't comment.
No, quite.
Catherine,
Right.
Catherine,
But, you know,
fire away.
Thank you. So yeah, congratulations again, and obviously support this recommendation to approve the plans. So congratulations on the work on that. There is sort of one area of tension that I see playing out very specifically in my ward, and I think Alex, you probably have a very similar experience as well. So we have a situation in Oxford where some of residents that are being impacted by wood burning are those who live either on a canal boat themselves or next to a canal boat. Now, those who are on moored vessels are going to be excluded from that. They often can be very vulnerable individuals, but also are most exposed to the wood smoke. So there's, you know, an issue for them as residents who are impacted by the effects of this, and how to work with them. The other challenge we've got is that the residents who live alongside the moored vessels that are burning wood smoke are calling for action to include the canal boats within scope of this. So herein lies the challenge. And so obviously we have got to, we all want to ensure that everybody has access to clean air. And so we need an action plan to very specifically address this tension. So I would like to see some kind of recommendation, and maybe it's a question about what is planned, Pedro and Anna, around this, to ensure that we're in a position where moored vessels are going to be supported in this transition for their own health benefits and the benefits of those around them. So a question about that. And I just want to say, as an addition, just as context, I went with some of the officers and had some interesting conversations, very valuable conversations with people living on canal boats in my ward, and some who are continuous cruisers as well. And we talked about the campaign and delivered letters about it, and also explained about the Eco Moorings project and got some feedback around the plans for that. And my understanding is that that is an excellent action, and really congratulations for getting the funding for that. And I know that that is separate from this particular recommendation about the smoke control orders coming under one, but it is not a solution for those residents who are permanently situated on the canal and living on the canal in Oxford. So, you know, what actions are we looking at to address that? And then what I would like to see is that we produce an action plan around working with those who are on the moored vessels, who are residential vessels, so that they can be in a position to be able to have their health protected, and the and residents who are living in the area. So very concrete actions with them, and it could be including like having focus groups to understand the barriers for them in the short term, so that we can devise an action plan. And so I would encourage us to maybe, if we have a recommendation, to have something that focuses on the process for getting the inputs, because the people that know the challenges the best are those who are living on the canal boats, but also we need to have it collaborative with those residents who are most severely affected, who are living on land, so that they both understand the sort of the challenges on both sides of the fence, basically. So question and a recommendation idea. Thank you.
I would endorse that. I'll just dive in very quickly. So I'd say much the same thing. I think in the report, it's actually quite difficult to spot the exemption for boats. And I think if there is a publicity point, I think it's probably quite important to flag that quite heavily, but be ready, as Catherine said, for quite serious push. But I can't remember, it's the gentleman who lives in Catherine's ward or the one to the south who has made something like 90% of the air pollution complaints in Oxford in the last 10 years, and it's all about canal boats. You know, there is there is quite a persistent set of challenges about the two things. So I'm very happy to endorse that recommendation. I should think about wording while you're responding, Anna and Pedro.
Yeah, so to start off with, I mean, not including them was obviously a deliberate decision. So there's sort of two parts of it. The first part is that making that change, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, Pedro, would actually require a referendum to change the terms of the thing. And secondly, like, to be honest, including them at this point, without having the actual options in place for them to be able to change, just feels too much like punching down. I mean, we have to, there are not actually a huge amount of permanent moored boats in Oxford. I think the report I've seen is a couple of hundred, that sort of order. But like, as you've said, Catherine, like, they can actually sort of they can be quite vulnerable. They can sort of be on the edges of things here. And actually, we have to be real that actually some of them cannot even afford to buy, like the good wood, and are literally just like scavenging stuff and storing on the top of their boat and burning it. So I think we do very much understand the challenges here. Not including them here was deliberate. And I think you are right that it probably needs to be outlined slightly better in this report why that is. I mean, I think my understanding is very much that the action plan sort of aspect to this is, I'm hoping actually one of the deliverables from the eco mooring trial. Like, the eco mooring trial is not very much just about like plonking in three pillars and then just be like, we're done. It's very much about this engagement piece. It's very much about finding out what works and what doesn't. And I'm hoping also a sort of a continuing education campaign as well about actually, this isn't just like pissing off your neighbours, this is actually doing yourself harm as well. But also, we hope to, so I'm sort of maybe passing the buck here, and then I'm sort of loading it onto another project, but that was certainly what I'm hoping that will be one of the outputs of that. And I will let Pedro, who got the funding for this, fill in the gaps I've inevitably left there.
Yes, so I think there are two dimensions to this. First one is that so we couldn't integrate all of this into this report. So having the expansion and introducing the moored vessels into the scope are two different procedures, and they are quite well established. There are specific DEFRA guidance that needs to be followed for each one of these procedures. So it's not that we are not thinking about it. It's that even if we wanted at the moment to include moored vessels, we couldn't, because DEFRA has a specific guidance and a specific separate procedure to include moored vessels, which has to include a specific public consultation just for that, where we involve all the groups in the city. So that's the first dimension. The second is, as Councillor Anna very rightly was saying, is that we kind of felt that we needed to provide alternatives and do a little bit more of work with this community before we just have this we dump this into them, basically. So and so going back to the eco moorings grants, and perhaps trying to explain a little bit more in detail what is at stake, it's as Councillor Anna said, it's not just about building the infrastructure. The actual grant includes funding for 1.5 years of funding to hire a community engagement officer that will be responsible to make the link between the eco moorings and the best practice and advice that we have already published via our Do You Fuel Good campaign. That community and engagement officer is also expected to be producing specific air quality guidance for the waterways, which will also talk about the best practice and advice. But not only that, it will also present to boaters all the ranges of current existing grants and retrofit schemes. Some of them have been recently launched by DEFRA that they can use to kind of move away from combustion and the adoption of renewable energy. So we kind of feel that a little bit more work needs to be done, so that then we can kind of, when we waive this, when we think about including moored vessels, we can already say, okay, but you know, you have this as an option, and we've already done this, and there are several options that you can take. So that, I think that was the idea. So those two dimensions.
Okay, thanks. I think I'll pick you up in a minute, Catherine. Just correct me if I'm interpreting this incorrectly. I think where we're probably coming from is to say, in layman's terms, one, we agree with you that excluding the moored boats for the reasons you've said is the right thing to do. So we're not disagreeing with that approach. I think the concern that we're flagging is, one, that we need to make it clearer that we are excluding them to avoid a load of distraction from, you know, a campaign saying you're picking on people who live on boats when we're not. So that was point one. So just making it clearer that they are excluded, and having done that, then being ready to deal with point two, which is Catherine's constituent as a good representative, who will then go, well, why on earth are you excluding moored boats? That's an outrage because they cause lots of problems, in which case we need to be ready. So it's all about preparation for those two eventualities and trying to minimize the risk of them happening. It's always frustrating as a council if you have, you know, a kind of a change.org petition telling you not to do a thing you're not doing, and that's kind of what we're trying to avoid, if you see what I mean. But there will be, I think Catherine's absolutely right to raise it, there will be some pushback from those who've long objected to, you know, the smoke pollution from the boats near their homes, and you know, perfectly reasonably so. And we need to make sure that we've got the message that you've outlined about, you know, the work that we're doing already through different means to try and address it through kind of education and support and all that kind of thing. So I think that's where the recommendation is. Catherine, do you want to just confirm or clarify?
Yeah, I confirm around the clarification of the messaging and the rationale. I think there is a second part of the recommendation, which is that using the community engagement officer, some work is undertaken to understand some of the barriers facing different boat dweller groups, because they are not all the same. Just like, they represent different characteristics, whether they're continuous cruising versus residential, and so understand the barriers that they have for adoption of clean fuels, and connected to that is for permission for you to seek grant funding opportunities to do further work on an action plan to support the permanent residents on boats to transition. So if these bid opportunities do come up, you've already got the permission to be sort of bidding for work, because I understand the turnaround time for some of that is can be short. That, because it could be that the eco moorings, because they're just for visitors, maybe grants could be sought for eco moorings, for instance, for permanent residents. I don't know, but just as an idea, but as a concrete example. Yeah,
I think we need to be slightly cautious about not making too detailed recommendations about something that's not covered. I think if we can kind of frame it in broad terms, not least because it's going to cabinet tomorrow. I think we've probably got three things probably. One, very strongly welcome it, because I think we all do. Secondly, the issue around preparation around the publicity, just thinking about the publicity, so making it clear that moorings are excluded and being ready to deal with the consequences of making it clear. And then a third point, which is not necessarily to be picked up at, you know, as an amendment to the report or anything like that, but as a kind of a longer term project thing, something around continuing to work with boating, the various different boating communities, plural, because it's not very much not singular, about the kinds of barriers to uptake and grants and things. So sorry, that last bit is probably slightly tricky to frame, but Alice, if you and Catherine could exchange emails, try and get that right, if that's possible, because I don't want to be kind of interpreting it. But ideally, if we can make that something which the cabinet member can kind of agree to, because it's kind of being done already, but you know, there's a record of it. I think that's where we probably want to be at ideally. Can I just ask Anna's confirmation that she's happy? It's always good to get the cabinet member to agree that they're going to agree our recommendations before we've written them down properly.
Sounds good.
Excellent. That's good. Right. I think we have three kind of things there, but I do want to make sure we have the strongly welcome element in that, if that's possible. Good. Right. Thank you both very much. So that takes us to item 9. And I'm going to welcome you both again. Air pollution. We've got a presentation from Pedro. I'm going to ask Emily and Catherine and myself to not interrupt it so we can run all the way through and then ask questions at the end. If there is something where he's used some term which is so opaque or confusing that you genuinely don't have any idea at all what he's talking about, I will allow a brief interruption for clarification. But otherwise, we're all going to have to wait to the end. Is that okay? Good. Right. Pedro, over to you to screen share, I hope.
Thank you, Councillor Alex. Let's see if this works. Can you see what I'm sharing?
Yes, it's showing up. Thanks.
Yeah, you're not in
The slide.
presentation view yet, so yeah, you are now.
Okay, so this item is all about you guys scrutinizing the air quality annual status report that was published in June this year. So this is part of our statutory duties on air quality, review and assess on an annual basis the status of air quality and the progress on the measures that Oxford City Council and its partners have committed to deliver as part of their air quality action plan to reduce air pollution in the city. So perhaps first slide just to highlight some of the good achievements that we had on this last reporting year, from July up until June this year. So we've in July 2022 inauguration of the Energy Super Hub, which is amazing because it brought to us 42 new fast and ultra rapid charging points. In January we had the confirmation and deal signed to bring the 159 electric buses to Oxford as part of the Zebra scheme. And I've picked up a third one, which was also a really good achievement. ODS was able to arrive to a 27% of their fleet fully electric, when their commitment was to arrive to 25% by 2023. So now focusing more on the air quality side of things. So in this last air quality year, we have expanded a lot our monitoring capability. We are now measuring nitrogen dioxide at 127 locations in the city. So roughly an increase of 45 diffusion tubes from 2021 to 2022. So in terms of nitrogen dioxide, so we have an annual mean legal target of 40 micrograms per cubic meter. And on our air quality action plan, we have committed to a specific local target, an annual mean of 30 micrograms per cubic meter. So much more kind of well, better than the legal one. So this is just gives you an idea of the historic air pollution data. in some of the locations where we measure in continuous historically in the city center. So you can see that overall there's been a downward trend of air pollution, nitrogen dioxide. We are at the moment fully compliant with nitrogen dioxide legal limit in the city center. We have a few locations that are still slightly above our local targets. Overall, we've seen county council levels show us an increase of 8% of traffic in 2021 when compared with the previous, in 2022 when compared with the previous year. But despite this 8% increase, NO2 levels have decreased in the same proportion, so by 8%, and they are still 24% below pre-pandemic times. So this is just to give you an understanding of how we compare against the national average. So nationally, nitrogen dioxide levels have reduced on roadside sites by 5% across the UK. So our reduction was of about 8%, so slightly better than the national average. So in terms of the results of the diffusion tubes of all this monitoring, so we have 12 locations out of those 127 that are above the local targets. You have them there on the screen. In terms of exceedances, we continue to have, we have St. Clements, the Plain, our historic air pollution hotspots, which measured 43 micrograms, so 3 micrograms above the legal limits. We had other exceedances that came out from the new tubes that were installed, so 2 on the Ring Road, which measured 42, 43, and 1 on Haddington Hill. It's worth perhaps to emphasize that the objective of deploying the tubes at these locations was for the sole purpose of trying to understand what the impacts will be of the traffic filters in terms of traffic displacement across the city. So these are not so much locations where we would normally monitor, because they are not residential areas, they're not areas where people live and are therefore exposed to air pollution. But Oxfordshire County wanted, and ourselves, we wanted to have a better understanding of the potential impacts of future traffic measures. Focusing now on the zero emissions on pilots and the impacts, because also 1 year has passed since the implementation of the scheme. So we can see that, you can see that we have pretty good coverage of air quality monitoring in the affected area. So Cornmarket, St. Michael's and St. George saw reductions of 3 micrograms of nitrogen dioxide. George Street and New Innall Street saw improvements as well of 2 micrograms each. And the levels that measured at Queen Street and Bond Square and New Road were practically unchanged. And we believe that this has essentially to do with the fact that they continue to be bus routes, and because buses continue to be the major emitter in the area, and that wouldn't have changed with the implementation of the zero emission zone, because the buses were not affected by it. So that's probably the reason why air pollution levels haven't changed in those areas. Now, in terms of LTNs, the results that we've published on the report say that all the monitoring locations inside the LTN showed clear decreases of NO2, with the biggest one being on Divinity Road, a reduction of 33% compared with data collected in previous years. We have reductions on Princess Street and St. Mary's neighborhoods as well. On boundary roads, the visibility, the conclusions are a little bit mixed. So so on one side, we can't see any perceptible negative traffic displacement impacts along Holloway Road and Oxford Road. On that side of the town, we have 3 diffusion tubes, and they all consistently show practically no changes compared with the previous years. At Morrill Avenue, we see reduction of air pollution in the 3 tubes that we have in there. At St. Clements, we have seen increases that are most likely due to the LTNs. So we have 3 tubes in there, and they all showed a consistent increase of air pollution levels. However, only at one location the limit went to levels above the legal limit, which is the one that I've mentioned before, close to the Plain, 43 micrograms per cubic meter. On Cowley Road, we also saw a very big increase, the biggest of all the increases seen, 35%, so 7 micrograms. And we believe that that's because this is a specific street that goes across the 3 LTNs, so St. Clements, the Divinity Road, and St. Mary's. So it's the only way traffic can flow, avoiding the rat runs, because they can't go through these areas. So that's why it's probably a cumulative effect of each one of these 3 LTNs. But nevertheless, the levels measured increased from 20 to 27, which is still below our local target. Now moving on to particulates. So we also have legal targets and the WHO recommended guidelines, which are supposed to be more strict and represent what is now seen as like the safest levels for these pollutants. So for PM10 chart on top of the presentation, PM2.5, it's the chart below. So you can see clear downward trends on both charts. In the case of PM10, we are fully compliant with the current UK legal limit values, and one of the monitoring stations, Oxford High Street, measured 1 microgram above the recommended World Health Organization guidelines. For PM2.5, levels seem to have plateaued at St. Ebbs for the last 3 years, and we've installed last year for the first time a new PM2.5 monitor on High Street, which registered an annual mean level of 1 microgram above the WHO guidelines. So I have my 2 last slides have to do with 2 things that I was asked also to kind of present on. The first one is on indoor air pollution. And so on this one, I just wanted to say that we currently, that this doesn't form part of the local air quality management regime that local authorities have the statutory duty to follow. However, we have been doing some work on these fields, and this is where it links with the expansion of the smoke control area that we are trying to implement, because there are several studies that also show that domestic wood burning triples the effects of the impacts on the air pollution levels inside your home. So we believe that by expanding the smoke control area, we are indirectly also addressing the indoor air pollution. Last slide, very quickly. I know it's very dense, and I'm not going to go through this all because we don't have time, but these are in essence the 9 recommendations that came out of the OxAir report, which I was asked to kind of include on this presentation in terms of telling or explaining where we are with those recommendations. So I have to say that many of these recommendations are not entirely specifically for local authorities. They are recommendations for future users, vendors, and people that for citizen science projects. However, there are a few recommendations which, in essence, tell us as local authority to be very cautious in the way we use these air quality sensor devices, and for us to be very cautious in how we publish the data, because these air quality sensors are not at the moment ready out of the box kind of technology that you can just plug in and immediately rely on the data that comes out of their screens. They need proper corrections and a lot of quality assurance and quality control before you get to the level where you can kind of rely on the data that is produced by them. That's me. Thank you very much.
Pedro, thank you. Your audience was more rapt here perhaps than it was with you. Anyway, could you stop sharing? I think, because otherwise there's a slight risk we try and kind of squint at that set of 9 recommendations. I saw one factual question from Emily in the chat, and I wanted to ask one factual question myself. So Emily's question was about Iffley Road as a boundary road for the LTN. Mine was around that frankly alarmingly large number you got for the Headington Hill monitoring station.
Mhm.
I couldn't see it on the map, so I just want to check, one, was 70 correct? Because if so, that's extraordinarily high. And two, where actually is it? Because as far as I could see on the map, it wasn't there.
Yeah.
So Iffley Road and Headington Hill, just on factual stuff.
Okay. Headington Hill. So it doesn't show on a map yet because so it has been installed this year, and we are actually in the process of migrating the old content of the old air quality website to a very brand new one, which will launch on the 18th of September. So basically next Monday. And we will have new mapping functionalities where you can see the locations of all the latest monitoring points. In terms of the location, it's at curbside, so completely far away from the pedestrian route, really arriving at the very top of the hill before the pedonal bridge. And it's on a lamppost that lies really on the road. So it's really kind of to capture the worst possible levels, but not the ones that people actually breathe, because people are a little bit more higher up and further away from the road when they walk up the hill.
Not if they're cycling up it. As somebody who
Sorry?
cycles up it quite a lot, I just wanted to know.
Yes, for the cyclists, yes, that is true. The cyclists would be exposed to those levels. That is true whilst they cycle up.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you very much.
Iffley, what was the question?
Is there any data on increase or decrease on Iffley Road as a boundary road for the LTN? It wasn't on your list of boundary roads.
Yes, I didn't include it on my presentation. I have it on the air quality report, I think, but I don't have it on the top of my head. But I'm happy to follow that up.
Or I can just look myself. Fine, thanks. I think it's constant. Okay. I just can't remember. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Right. Okay. So that was a couple of factual ones. Comments or broader questions, Catherine?
Yeah, thank you. So point of clarification, you mentioned around indoor air pollution not being part of this, but just wondered where sort of the restaurant businesses fit in scope of any monitoring, because I understand that there can be air pollution challenges, I think, from a public health perspective of those who are actually working in the kitchens. But connected to that, and I think, again, it's out of scope of the statutory duty, but there is this issue with street traders using diesel and as a fuel when they are cooking, and they lack the infrastructure for alternatives. So I'm wondering whether you've explored solutions for them around that, and whether that's something that we can request, because that's in the city centre on High Street in areas where there are high levels of the different pollutants. And then secondly, there is a question around public exposure and messaging. I understand that there's a section around local engagement in the report, and that there are plans for engagement about the levels of air pollution. And I guess as to disclose that I was one of the participants in the Oxair project. I forgot to mention that earlier, but one of the recommendations that the participants came up with was the demand for public information boards in central locations around current levels of air pollution. And I wondered whether that has been considered as part of the local engagement approach. And if it hasn't, is that something that can be recommended, please?
Pedro, do you want to pick those points up, and then I'll take Emily?
Certainly. So in terms of indoor air pollution and kitchens, fumes from kitchens, so that is currently being dealt specifically by the environmental health team within Oxford City Council. So they are the ones who visit those premises and need to assess whether the installations are compliant with the relevant kind of standards. So that's specific work that is being done by them. With regards to with regards to what you said about the vans and the diesel generators, is actually interesting that you've mentioned that, because I've just received an hour ago an email from Councillor Louise Upton on that very same kind of issue. So it's not something that we've actively pursued so far, but it's certainly something that we can have a look into. It's Councillor Upton is even suggesting that there's potentially some market for giant batteries that could eventually replace those kind of generators. So it's she gave me a contact, and it's something that I'm keen to explore.
And the live data point.
Yeah, the public display boards.
So that was very much on the agenda and still is. We had the idea, we had several conversations with Oxfordshire County Council with regards to the possibility of installing public digital screens in some of the central areas of the city that could provide information on air quality, on the status of air quality levels, air pollution forecasts, and things like that. So that kind of work was kind of put on hold whilst we were developing the air quality, Oxfordshire Air Quality website, which was because it was on the website that we actually are going to kind of launch those tools. So we're going to launch forecast for 5 days. We're going to launch an air pollution alert system. We're going to launch a series of tools that then we will have, and then we can use to kind of progress those ideas. So it's very much still in the agenda, but I guess we will need to find the correct grant to kind of apply for good funding to try to kind of put that on, to try to, take it out from paper and try to kind of.
Can I just check what data would it actually be displaying? Would it be the kind of national forecast data where you get?
It could be something. Yeah, it's still open for discussion, but it could be potentially the daily air quality index, which tells you whether the air pollution levels are acceptable or not on that very specific day. Some elements of the forecast, which can tell you whether air pollution is expected to be worse within the coming days, and also some of the locations of the monitoring points, for example, that we have across the city, so that people can have a better understanding of what is being monitored and where. Those are some ideas. But as I said, we would have to kind of explore in more detail what could potentially be included.
Thank you. Sorry, I pulled a face. I think my daughter's been spraying volatile organic compounds around just beneath me. Emily.
Yeah, look, again, great report. Love the charts. I think it's really illustrative of some of the successes that we've had, and indeed they've been nationally. Quick question: is there an easy way of cutting how many residents have seen what reduction? So I did this myself in my ward using my ward lists, whatever it's called, sorry, I forgot the electoral roll lists, because it was LTN relevant, and saw that about 95% of people have benefited and about 5% of people have seen a decline. It's like that 10% raise in St Clement's. Is there a simpler way of doing this, or not at all? Because it would be interesting to know, what effect is residents, people that are on streets for a long time, are seeing. The answer might be no. I just don't know if we hold central data.
So sure if I understood the question. An easy way of what? Of people having access to the information?
It's more
or just us doing an analysis of like how many residents across Oxford have benefited, significantly versus worsened.
Yeah, it's presentational point, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, because we're talking about, the thing is, because we're talking about what's happening in the locations, which is great, but people want to know what's happening to people. But again, that may be hard. I imagine it involves pivot tables and quite a lot of complex complexity, but I wondered if that was possible at any point. But like, I don't want to add a massive amount to workload. You've done a report, which is fine. Maybe next time it would be interesting to see if there's something that we could do that talks about the effects on the residents.
Yeah,
Because basically, it doesn't matter what happens in Port Meadow, right? Like, let's be honest, it's miles away, so there's no one lives there. But like, what happens in Jericho has a massive effect because it's probably some of the densest housing. So that's all I'm thinking.
Yeah, as long as we cross-refer it with the amount of time people spend on buses in St Clements.
Yeah, well, exactly. Or indeed Oxford students who are only here 24 weeks a year.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Again, it looks pretty bad for the ZEZ zone,
Yeah.
but actually residents there are not here. So yeah, like how do we cross that? It might be too impractical.
I'm going to give that one sort of Pedro and Anna as kind of, wearing your data analysis whiz hats and see if you can, take that one away and run with it.
It's not an action for now, guys. It's a thing that might be interesting next time something like this is looked at, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's an important visualization point because at the moment what we've got is dots, numbers, streets, particularly when we've got people who are, as you well know, keen to dig out raw data and try and use it rather than the properly adjusted and rebased data, which is how you're supposed to use it. So identifying, different ways of presenting and framing it could be quite useful. So I think that's a valid point, but probably one for people who are good at data presentation, which I'm sure you two of you are. They're refusing to be flattered into saying yes, aren't they? Well, one question that I wanted to pick up. I mean, and of course, the danger with all of this is it becomes a debate about the micro impacts of LTNs and things like that. It's the use of this data as a decision-making tool, particularly when we are the authority with responsibility for gathering the data, and the County Council is responsible for many of the decisions that impact on it. And I think it's well known that there were a range of views between county and city members over the wisdom of proceeding with closing Divinity Road without forethought, which seems to be rather reinforced by these obviously positive impacts, which Emily's alluded to for a lot of residents, but there's some quite serious knock-on negative impacts. How can we ensure that this data is informing decision making in a holistic way, rather than being kind of like picked out, and used in a myopic way? Sorry, I've lost my word there, but myopic is as good as any.
I mean, I guess it just, yeah, I mean, it has to be put in front of the decision maker in as clear a format as possible. I mean, I think for most people, data is not actually convincing, I hate to say, as like a data scientist, but it's not. I think the value here is for our county colleagues making decisions on it. So, yeah, I don't really have a good, I don't know, do I have an actual point here? I don't think so. But I think, I mean, the other thing with this report is a lot of it is actually like quite statutory, and you have to present it in a certain way. So actually the executive summary, the bits that have been teased out, which are LTN region, East Oxford LTN region specific, very much are for, I think, our county decision maker colleagues here, because I think, yeah, that was not required for the like DEFRA statutory reporting. But yeah, I don't think I have a point here. I think Pedro, did you also wanted to jump in, didn't you?
Sorry, Pedro.
No, on the report, yeah, it's pretty much kind of there's a template that DEFRA requires us to follow. So all the structuring and the content of the report pretty much needs to obey to specific rules and the specific templates of DEFRA. So there's not many flexibility in there in terms of what we can present. but yeah, I think it's a difficult one, but we have been improving our relationship with county colleagues, and at the same time we have been I think they now have a much better understanding of air quality and what are the requirements to do good air quality monitoring before the intervention, after, so that we are able to help them. They are able to help us to help them, if that makes sense. So that we clearly saw a much better outcome in terms of the way things happen with the East Oxford LTNs as opposed to the previous LTN, in the sense that we were able to kind of help them on a much better way as we were better informed. And so I think we just need to continue with this good relationship, and so hopefully making sure that our role as with the statutory duty that we have is to provide the best data that we can, and then make sure that that data arrives to the people who make the decisions.
I had one other comment, and then I'm going to pick Catherine up. Just thinking about the restrictions you're under, the format restrictions. This has got to follow a particular structure and so on. So it's the classic kind of government. This is the situation that is. So it's big, it's substantial. You read it, it goes on a shelf, and and everybody's kind of ticked the box and can move on. What would be helpful, I think, is to have alongside it the action sheet from the Air Quality Action Plan, because the successes that you pointed to, I think, are real and concrete, and it's helpful. It would be useful to know what the next priorities are, and the approach we've kind of taken with county and other partners is a kind of sector by sector approach. So you saw the picture of the buses, the chargers. We're looking at projects which are around delivery vehicles, small delivery vehicles, large delivery vehicles might be the next big challenge, refrigerated delivery vehicles, whatever. So it tends to be sector by sector. It would be kind of helpful to have alongside this this is what we've done, this is what we're going to do next, this is the difficult stuff that's going to take a little bit longer, in a simple kind of easy to read format. I think it would both be helpful in reinforcing what we've already done, but puts it in a context that's not static in terms of time, if that makes sense. That was my comment. It could be a suggestion that this publishes alongside it, but we've got a fairly blank sheet of paper here rather than a cabinet report, so quite how that recommendation might form itself, I don't know. But I saw you nod, Pedro, so I'm going to assume you agree that would be a good thing. So
I personally agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think the current structure that we are being imposed by DEFRA is not the best one. It's a massive document, and we can often get lost in there. There is, in the middle of all those pages, on, I think it's table 2 or something, there's a massive table that is supposed to give an update on every single one of the 30 measures that we have committed to deliver in our air quality action plan until 2025. And so that big table provides the updates on where we are in terms of those deliveries. But obviously it's a table that is lost in the middle of all those pages. So perhaps I could kind of try to kind of put it on a separate document so that people can more easily access it.
I would go with a one maximum 2-page executive summary. I mean, I know the table was there. The difficulty often, I'm using a massive screen. If you're using a small screen, it's literally unreadable, and if you're on a really small screen, you can't even see it. So, right, I think we could make that a recommendation of some sort, some kind of executive summary of progress, but not the kind of full technical detail of the plan, but at a kind of very much executive level. Which concludes my point. So, Catherine, you've been waiting very patiently. Sorry about that.
It's really building on what you're putting forward as an executive summary, because I think we need something that is for public consumption, that summarises what we're doing, but also the business case and the economic case for doing it. So the cost savings to the NHS, for instance, of these improvements that we've had in air quality, there are, there's a value in savings to the health system. For instance, I know Suzanne Bartington, I think she's one of the public involved in some of the Oxair projects, and I believe she does work in this kind of scope. So what I think I'd like to see is something that is like infographics, a very short and sweet, that goes into the case for why we're doing this, the actual benefits to individuals, but also to our economy and to the health system and to the wider society, of some of the successes we've had as well as the challenges. Now, I sort of feel that that this is maybe it's a communications exercise. It might be there's existing budget there from comms that can be applied to this, but it would be separate, obviously, from your legal statutory report. But I'd like to see within it, what it has enabled. So, for instance, you mentioned the success on Divinity Road. It's not just the residents, it is now a key commuting route for children who are going to secondary school at Cheney, and that is benefiting them in terms of the air quality for them on their route to and from school. So some kind of infographics highlighting this sort of thing. And as inspiration, it was a very different topic, but I've seen some excellent work done by the City of Amsterdam in the Netherlands around setting out the business case for reallocating road space to cycle lanes, for instance, and what the economic value and benefit is to the city of doing that because of costs, greater spend because people spend more time in specific areas. And that might provide some inspiration for you. That what I'm a bit conscious of is recommending sort of what I'd like to see is actually going over and above simply an executive summary to for this, and maybe that's too much from what is possible, but ideally that would help sell, I think, some of the positive results, but also some of the actions that you're looking to continue to implement going forward.
I think my view on that is that I think that is a good thing. I think we've got to be slightly conscious that this is framed around the air quality report. So we've got a data scientist, and Pedro, your qualifications in environmental science. We kind of basically just ask you to make stuff up. I imagine I'm sure the evidence will be there. You just don't have it to hand, is what I mean. You'd have to go out and either seek the evidence or come up with something. So I think it's a message for the broader, in fact, both public authorities or the broader public authorities. I think Catherine's absolutely right that and this goes actually to Anna's point, which I completely agree with. I find data compelling, but I'm very aware that the vast majority of people do not find data compelling at all, and they need stories. And I think that's what we're getting at. So those individual stories, I used to travel by car to school because my asthma was so bad because of the traffic, that now I can cycle because I live on a road that's, those kinds of stories I think are infinitely more compelling about making the case for the kinds of measures that both councils have been pursuing than any amount of data, numbers, or even maps, I'm afraid, though it pains me to say it. Quite. I think Anna sums up the frustrations of us all with that expression. I think probably the recommendations, there's probably a part one and a part two recommendation. So the recommendation on part one is for some kind of executive summary, which is around progress on the action so far and what's next. So something that's easily understood and easily digested, rather more so than the DEFRA standard format. And then I think, picking up Catherine's point, a recommendation perhaps to the broader cabinet, which you don't necessarily always do, to consider how to identify and promote the broader financial health and so forth benefits of action to improve air quality. I think that that's probably where we need to go. I think it's probably just asking slightly too much of Pedro and Anna on this to do all of that. But I think the Amsterdam example is a good one. I think they're taking some major steps. I think on one of the circular grachts, Prinsengracht, possibly, can't remember which one, to remove all parking from it. And I think that will be a really interesting experiment to see how that goes. And of course, you can use donut. I'm sure Amsterdam are using their donut economics approach there. So again, framing device. Is everyone content with those recommendations? We're going to get this report every now and again. So I don't want to kind of, you know, feel that we're skimming over it, because we do have the opportunity to come back. But I think, you know, I think detail is not what's required here. It's the broader brush, and it's the storytelling, the narrative, which I think is probably important. So I hope those recommendations are helpful. Pedro certainly agreed, and I saw Anna nod despite her despair over the data issue. And if we can send those both in due course and see what you can come up with. But again, it's about publicity and messaging. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, which is really good. I have to say, your final slide was so dense. I'm sure it's brilliant, but I didn't absorb very much of it. But nonetheless, I think probably as a comment for Anna, that the Headington Hill number is so bad, you're going to have to think very carefully about how that gets handled when it comes out. You know, that's beyond the ring road, and that's going to be, you know.
I mean, this has already, you do know this has already come out, right? This came out in June, and there was
the Headington Hill number in it.
Yeah, with the Oxford Mail reported on it.
I don't remember the Headington Hill number being.
I don't think, I'm not sure. No, they're mainly focused on St Clements.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it is very much. Is it literally under a bridge as well, Pedro? Because it's like, it's definitely in the sort of like really high
it's in the canyon. I know which. I
thought
yeah.
it might also be under the footbridge.
It's exactly where the buses are sort of like straining hardest to get up the hill. That's why it's so bad.
Yeah, and there's no air circulation, and yeah, it just sits there. So.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah. Right. Oh, I've just been told my bins are being picked up tomorrow, which is odd, because it's also City Council's. That's not right. It's been reminder for Friday, and it's Tuesday. What are they on about? Right. Sorry, slight distraction there. Thank you very much for that. That takes us to item 10, the net zero master plan, for which we are officerless. So Pedro,
bye to Pedro, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Anna, feel free to stay if you want. Are you okay? You don't have to. And I should check actually with Catherine and Emily. Are you okay for Anna to stay? Yeah, they're saying yes. So you're under moral pressure now to stay.
I mean, so the alternative is a parish council meeting.
I'd say our conversation's probably compelling. So, right. So we will move onto I guess a bit of paper, onto item 10 and the master plan. So we've got the document in front of us with a summary of completed actions. The idea here is to pick out how we're going to usefully scrutinize this. So it's really a somewhat processy thing here. What should we be best doing in order to add value to the work of the council, to the work of the cabinet member? So if we can avoid kind of like picking up the detail of it, it's what we can add and what we can input. So we've agreed at a very meta level that we want to talk about this, but I want to make sure that what our outputs are useful. So do we want to deep dive into certain elements of it? Do we want to assess deliverables and make suggestions about how they can be improved? Do we want to do gap analysis on the document and try and identify things which should be in the next iteration, etc.? Over to my fellow panel members. Not getting. Emily, did you have was that a tentative finger?
That was a tentative. I'm not entirely sure. It would be interesting to get Councillor Railton's perspective on how we can actually genuinely add value. The thing that I don't like doing in documents like this is focusing on the reds exclusively, because actually I just don't think it's that helpful. And I'm keen to understand really where the value sits. This may now have been reordered in terms of the kind of the impact. But yeah, in general, I think it's useful for people to have to use meetings like this as a stage progress report, where they can report progress made since last time, plus any kind of key decisions or limiting factors that are currently outstanding. But I'm beyond that. I'm not. Yeah. See, there goes quite a tentative hand, as I told you.
Yeah, no, that was fairly tough, but I think it's a fair point. I mean, we kind of agreed we wanted to see this report very regularly, so we could have it as a standing item and just look at it and go, nothing much changed, nothing much to worry about, we'll nod and move on. Or we could pick up an element. I mean, for what it's worth, I would agree with you that seeing a couple of red blobs and then kind of like getting panic stricken about those is probably not helpful in a one-off session. If we have this come back to us and things which were red remain red, and
yes,
there's no good reason for that or whatever, then I think it's worthy of looking in more detail as to why it is. I think it was a good example of this, not on this report, but on one of the monitoring reports that goes to Cabinet, which one of the Cabinet members raised. It's kind of inherently red, one of the indicators, or inherently bad, because it involves, political risk and risk of world instability. Well, I mean, brilliant. What can you do? It's always going to be high at the moment. So yeah, there's those things. But is it helpful to have that flagged, or is it just a piece of background information? So I think if it's something that the council can or should act upon to address the redness of the issue, that's one thing. If it's just, well, yeah, it's red because it's red. We're in a climate crisis, well, we know that, and we're acting accordingly. I don't think we can kind of try and change the colour of the square because it is by definition red. I hope that made sense. Catherine, you've got your microphone off, so
yeah, I just what I think could be useful for something like this is just sort of for the regular check-ins of this, having just a one-side memo highlighting a few of the pertinent issues within it to focus our attention, because as you say, there's a lot in there and it's difficult to navigate. But if there are specific issues that officers think that we should be focusing our attention on during our discussions, because maybe they are green and that practice needs to be replicated at a speedier rate because it can be rolled out further, or there are things that are not on it at all but because change in circumstances mean that that we could be actually needing to add to it. These sorts of points could then be highlighted very briefly up front, and then the focus of our attention might be different each time we see it. So I don't want us to be committing to a singular approach when actually what might be appropriate at one time is different for the different meetings. And maybe just to give you a concrete example from a different scrutiny panel where we were looking at with the Future Oxfordshire Partnership, there are standing items that come up, but because of inflationary pressures, it meant that suddenly there was a bigger discussion about some of the items which were standard discussion items due to then a change in prioritization because of those inflationary pressures. So it's about highlighting those sorts of changing circumstances that merit discussion, maybe.
Yeah, Anna, come in.
It's just, so this is something that frustrates me in general, actually, which is when there are subsequent versions of documents, is not being able to see in software terms what is called like the diff, as in like what actually changed. It's very easy in software, like our entire jobs are set up around like reading what is the diff between this piece and this piece, and it's like coloured in a certain way and great. But like it's infinitely frustrating to me that, you know, there's one 50-page document and a very slight update to it, and I have to like play spot the difference to work out what it is. So I feel like, yeah, some way of, you know, quarterly seeing the diff of this document is essentially, I think, what we're driving at, and it's something I want for all of the documents actually. But I don't. Yeah, I mean, a tracked changes thing. I don't really know how sort of best to do it. I don't know if like Alice actually has good advice here, as somebody who's probably seen quite a lot of this. Like, is there a good way of doing this? Because it's really frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think it can be done. If we look at the quarterly monitoring reports that are produced for Cabinet, they tend to cover what's changed in the text. So they'll draw attention to it there. So, you know, this risk has changed, you know, inflation is a very good one, as Catherine said, you know, persistent inflation has taken stuff from this to this, and you can draw attention to it in that way. So maybe what we're looking for is for Alice, before we consider this, to ask for, you know, no more than 1 page of stuff that's changed or whose priority has increased or decreased, something of that sort. Alice, is that okay? Is that sort of thing you're okay to ask? Do you think
of course.
you get it?
I can try my best.
I mean, one thing which I thought stepped out to me looking at it, and which isn't necessarily drawn out by looking at it, you know, sort of as it stands, is there are a lot of particularly future measures, but some current measures which are dependent on staffing in particular departments, so staffing and skills. You can see it kind of comes up repeatedly. Now, those of us who are very long in the tooth, like me, will recognize that if somebody's drafting a document like this and wishes to highlight that they think their department should have a bit more budget, this is a very good way of kind of subliminally suggesting that. But nonetheless, if these measures are genuinely dependent on staffing that does not currently exist or skill levels that currently are not in place, then clearly they're not fully deliverable or deliverable at all. And so that should inform, say, budget process, but it should also inform, if it's a skills issue, it should inform like a training priorities issue. You know, if we can't address that. Sorry, Emily, I'm going to have to mute you in a minute. It's all right, done. So you see the issue. You know, there is something there, and I think we might want to kind of poke at that. The concern is always, and I'm going to use a former departmental head who is now long retired, and happily so, I'm sure, because he was a genius at doing this. It is that every budget round he would carefully drop the hint that a whole load of really important frontline services that all councillors cared about would be decimated if his budget wasn't increased, and he'd do it so painful, you know, such a, you know, and as a result, for years his budget was sort of nudged up when everybody else's was decreased. So the expansion of environmental health was down to some gloriously skilled small p political management. The issue I think here is if we have got a series of actions which are only deliverable through a particular skill set, then it would be good to review that. And if you look across the lines, you know, do we have the skills in ES, skills not present in ES specialist support needed comes up a lot. And I think that's probably where I'd want to focus. So can I suggest that because 29th of November, which is our next meeting, it's pretty late in the budget round. I think what we probably want is somebody from ES, so at a senior level, to be at our next meeting to address these issues, and not to come along and say, you know, I've put in lots of budget bids, and if I don't get them, it's all terrible. I'd want them to come with a reflection of, you know, the financial realities of local government across the country and in Oxford, and some lateral thinking as to how, if their budget bits do not succeed, how they are going to address the issue through other means. Is that, I'm particularly looking at Anna, who would be the lead cabinet member for that. Are you okay with that?
I think so. I think ES is that energy. I'm
It's
actually not sure
it's
what
the
ES.
environment team.
Because we lost quite a numbers of staff on this energy side, which I think still had not been backfilled.
Yeah, and it's a
right.
challenge around, it's a small team and it's specialist, and so you know,
Yeah.
2 members of staff leaving and you suddenly got a gaping hole. It's, you know, same with kind of heritage conservation people and planning. It's always, or any organisation where you've got a small team of specialists, which I think then throws up another lateral thinking conversation. You know, is a small team of specialists the way to go? Do you want broader embedding of skills across the organisation, for example? Catherine, sorry, I've gone off rambling now. I think.
If this human resource and capacity element needs to be discussed either regularly, you know, we could have a standard in that cover brief, but also very specifically for next time, given that some of the resources coming not just from the civil servants based at the City Council, but sort of the outsourced through ODS, would we also need to involve some of the ODS human resources person as well, given that certain actions are commissioned to them? Or would that be going a step too far?
I think what we should, with ODS, I mean, I think actually looking at these actions, a lot of them are very much client side. And I think we should treat ODS as a contractor, because it is. And so we need to be looking at, you know, what the client is doing to manage that, whether it's with ODS or whether it's a different third party organisation as a contractor. I mean, that should be part of the conversation. If we haven't got in-house skills, how do we use external skills, whether it's with a partner organisation like ODS, third party organisation like a professional consultancy, or another bit of the local authority family? You know, there might be skills that we can use in another local authority and we should be partnering with them. So I think I'd keep it slightly separate. There's a danger if you've got the client and the contractor in the same room that they kind of, you know, the conversation isn't as open as we might want.
Right, I agree, I support that.
Is there anything else in this particular document that anybody wants to pick up now, or are we happy that we take our meeting in November, which I'm trying to remember, Alice, when is it we've moved it until you just got back, or have we moved it before you go away? So you'll have just got back.
Yeah.
Which is why it's a little bit late in the round, but I think if we flag this now, cabinet members heard, flag it to the director / head of service, as it were, they will hear. I mean, I think if we can have a report back based around the master plan, but picking up this issue of skills and resourcing, how is it going to be taken forward? And by that time, it should be slightly clearer what the budget round is looking like. I'd hazard a guess that the government isn't going to be generous to places like Oxford, or indeed local authorities, full stop, in the budget round in a run up to an election, because that's not how it works. So I think, you know, at a senior level, officers and members will have a clearer idea of how things are going to look and can speak accordingly. Good, excellent. Thank you very much for that. So that then, I think, concludes all our business. We can let Anna go.
Thanks. Wasn't there like point 4?
That's notes from the previous meeting.
Right.
Yours weren't objectionable, so at least not to me. If you want to stay for
That's
those,
fine.
feel free. You can,
That's all right,
you know,
okay.
you can be a member of the public, or you could go to your parish council meeting.
I'll go
Highly
to
up
the
to you.
parish council meeting.
Okay. So
Guys, thank you.
That takes the notes of the previous meeting, so our minutes. Any amendments we're happy to approve? Yep, good. That takes us to item 5 and the work plan. I need to just be careful how I word this. One of the items on the work plan, so this is on page 17 onwards, around tree planting and maintenance. We agreed that we'd look at it, and we still want to. The scoping document makes reference to the tree management policy, which was just one of a number of documents. Obviously you'll be aware that there was a tragedy involving a tree in the last couple of weeks. As a result of the ongoing HSE investigation, we should probably avoid framing our discussion around the tree policy, because the HSE are wanting to look at it. So I'd like us to still continue with the item, but wrap it around some of the other stuff rather than the policy document itself. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah, good, excellent. Thank you for that. So on the broader work plan itself, at the moment we've got net zero master plan coming every single time. Is there a preference as to which of the scoping reports you want to bring forward, or any comments on scoping reports on the order of those things? So we've got the 3 listed there. Any preferences, or should we just go with what Alice is able to get the best and quickest response from officers from?
Well, happy with what's best in terms of response from officers, but I wonder with the local plan development, whether with those timelines there is a preference for us to look at one or the other before, or sooner or later.
Haven't we just been notified that there's going to be a local plan section regulation 19 approval meeting on November the 3rd?
Oh, of course, yes. So that will have already happened.
So the consultation will be underway. So
yeah,
at which point there's not a massive amount that we could do to influence it. I mean, we could do something which would influence behind the scenes, because what happens after the regulation 19 is there's a kind of ongoing negotiation between the inspector, objectors and the council. So we could soft influence that, but I think in terms of influencing anything that's going out to consultation, we will have missed that boat.
that's fine then.
Okay.
Or no preference otherwise.
Emily, you're happy to go with whoever's most responsive. Alice and I will just work on that, and if Alice gets pushed back, I'll shout and rant at cabinet members, make them play ball. Brilliant. Okay, we'll work on that. We will try and pin down. Oh, sorry, Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, I did have a little point on just because on the objectives, and apologies for the background noise, but just on the energy generation and then the retrofit, so those two ones, and I think yeah, just I don't know whether you want me to just provide those.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, if there's anything we can improve these, go ahead.
Yeah, so with the retrofit, I just wondered whether we could just clarify just any best practice that can be applied to retrofit of different building types. So residential, privately owned versus HMO and private sector rent, and then maybe the more retrofit of commercial premises, because the best practices and approaches might be slightly different for each. And then on the energy efficiency of buildings, the council buildings, I think leisure facilities and then the town hall, which is if I understand it right, is a grade 2 listed building. They're very different types of buildings. And so whether we want to specifically identify actions that are relevant for a listed building with regards to this energy generation, but also energy efficiency and solar. And so these lessons learned from other authorities. So what's within the control and what's feasible based on what's been done elsewhere.
I think you're right to flag those. Both of those ought to come up as an integral part of both reviews. The intention with the historic with the retrofit one was to avoid getting into the into the weeds of being prescriptive about particular approaches. I think you're right to kind of flag the importance of not sort of diving in sort of tight on historic buildings, which I know the council's very keen to talk about because it thinks it's quite good at that, not with, you know, and with reasonable reason. But you know, we talked about council-owned stock earlier. HMO is an interesting point, and you know, commercial, you know, there's proposals in a lot of planning applications coming through from very high performing buildings in terms of energy efficiency and generation. It would be quite interesting to see how they perform in reality rather than on paper, because you know, people do stupid things like open windows, fuck it all up. But it's more about yeah, so it's a much about process. And on the energy generation one, yes, we should get some best practice out of that. I think where we can add value is looking at the processes the council's using for identifying these opportunities and whether it's doing it effectively or not. So I think it's stepping one back away from the actual implementation. It's, you know, are the skills there to do it properly? Are, you know, are schemes being brought forward in a meaningful way? Are economies of scale being used, and so on and so on. So and you know, are lessons being learned and recorded? Is the institutional memory at work? So I think that's where we can probably add the biggest value around these issues, is around that. And always a challenge when you're a small scrutiny panel and you've got one officer who comes and you think they've got it and then they get poached by someone else. So yeah, interesting challenge, but I think that's where the big issues are.
No, that's helpful. Thank you for the clarification.
Okie doke. Right, so if we're happy with the climate, with the work plan, then Alice and I will kind of compare notes over the next few weeks and see which ones we've got put together an agenda the next time on this basis, and you know, any nudging and shoving you do. If there are any other things which, you know, obviously I'll get asked about cabinet papers that are coming, whether you want to review them. If there's anything that you know, can see on the forward plan and go, I would dearly love to look at that, then just email everyone and we can pick it up. Right, so that was the work plan. Report back on recommendations. It's item 6. I had a comment which echoes something I've said before in previous roles. I find the yes no really unhelpful. And I thought the responses on the TAN recommendations quite a good example of why I find it unhelpful. If you look at recommendation 5, our recommendation was that the council considers using LDOs, and the answer is no. And then it says in the text, yes, pretty much. So, you know, it's completely incoherent. And when I challenged the cabinet member about the apparent inconsistency, the answer came back was that officers did, you know, were open to considering LDOs, but didn't want to do so immediately, you know, which, yeah, the yes no forced them into a position of saying something I think is unhelpful. So I was a bit disappointed. I don't want to kind of like have a ping pong about the recommendations, and you know, I will continue to kind of press the cabinet member because that seems probably a slightly more effective route. But I did find the responses yeah, not wholly satisfactory, let's put it that way, but the others were fine.
Is there a way that with the responses, it's not a simple yes no binary, but there could be partial? Because I think I've seen that done somewhere, and that speaks to the like, we'll do it, but maybe not the timeline that you're asking for.
I think cabinet members have taken different views at different times. I think partial or partly or something is a response. You get yes, no, and partly. I, as a cabinet member, instigated just ignoring that column and refusing to put anything in it because I just felt a discursive answer was more useful. But the most recent and current chairs of scrutiny have insisted that there has to be a yes, no. So, you know, I think they're wrong, but I can see why they want to do it because it makes it easier to count the number of yeses and the number of no's. But there we are. Yeah, anyway, that was just me getting that off my chest. So is there anything else you wanted to pick up, either of you, on this? No, Emily's gone very still. No, she's back. It's all right. So your background's kind of faded you. It's sort of like it's quite entertaining. You look like Tintin to me. It's kind of like, yeah, exactly. It's kind of look like you got an enormous quiff.
Very true.
Right. That takes us to dates of future meetings. Can you note the dates? We're meeting in November. Note that we are slightly late in the cycle because we've already agreed the slight shift. So again, just because I can't remember where Cabinet's going to be, but potentially it's going to be quite soon afterwards. Anything that people can do to kind of look at the reports and give Alice a little bit of forewarning of potential recommendations just makes her job slightly easier to kind of prepare the recommendations. That would be great. Fantastic. Well, thank you all very much. Recommendations will be agreed ASAP on the items that are going to Cabinet and slightly more leisurely the ones that are not. And I'll see you all, well, see you at full council, I guess. Not Alice probably, but everyone else. So yeah, we'll catch up then.
Thank you. Thank you for running the time as